A new U.S. intelligence report painting a grim picture on the future of Afghanistan. It warns that the gains made by our brave troops and their coalition allies will be mostly gone by 2017, predicting this will happen even if some U.S. troops remain in the country. At the same time, it finds the Taliban and other militant groups gaining ground. On top of this, it says Afghanistan will plunge into chaos unless it signs a security deal with the United States that will keep troops there beyond next year. And finally, intelligence analysts are saying that they're anticipating that the central government in Kabul will grow increasingly irrelevant in the country's affairs. Our next guest has been to Afghanistan 10 times, Michael Hanlon, senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Michael, good to see you.
Thank you. Likewise.
First of all, what is your takeaway? I mean, is it as bleak and black and white as some of the American intelligence officials believe it to be?
Now, from what I can tell of this report, and I'm sure there's a lot of very smart thinking and research within it, the overall headline is not quite correct, or at least the way it's being summarized, for example, in yesterday's Washington Post story. The idea that we can confidently predict growing Taliban influence in Afghanistan, I think is not right. There certainly is a chance of that. And certainly if you're going to project out multiple scenarios, you have to worry about that being one of them. And I agree with the report when it says that if there is no ongoing U.S. or international presence and less U.S. and international aid than currently planned, that's bad news. That probably means the Taliban will have very good prospects for returning to power and granting sanctuary to extremists. But I think we have to look at some of the more positive developments, and we can get into those if you wish, but beginning with the Army and police in Afghanistan having basically held their positions all through 2013, when we have really downsized our own role in this war. That's encouraging news, and I'm not sure it's reflected adequately in the report.
So then, Michael, you're saying, listen, people, you don't feel like there's going to be this sudden rise of the Taliban. You feel that the Afghan army will have a presence there.
Yeah, the Taliban is strong, a lot stronger than we would like, and they've continued to be resilient, even in the face of our troop surges over the years and the work of Stan McChrystal and Dave Petraeus and John Allen and all the other great American men and women in uniform who have been fighting as part of this huge international coalition, and yet through it all, the Taliban stayed resilient. And I have to acknowledge that's been very disappointing and somewhat surprising. Having said that, this year, what happened was the international presence really got cut by more than half. And yet, the Taliban did not gain territory. The major cities, the major transportation arteries are still in government hands. Now, admittedly, they're backed up by us when they really get into a pinch, but they're doing 95% of the major operations themselves with minimal or no help. And I think that's very encouraging news. So we should certainly not be fatalistic about Afghanistan.
Okay, and let me get back to the impact of the report. And Michael, I want to ask you two-pronged question here. What's the impact of this report on President Obama's deadline of pulling American troops out of Afghanistan by the end of next year, and that tenuous negotiations to provide legal coverage and security for the international troops who might be left in place, and then talk about the psyche of the American people?
Right. Well, first of all, I think President Karzai or his successor, and let's not forget there's a presidential race brewing in Afghanistan. The elections are scheduled for April, and they'll probably be held on time or nearly on time. And I think any of the people who could be sitting in the Afghan palace come spring or summer would want a deal with the U.S. because they don't want the Taliban to come back to power, and they're realistic enough at the end of the day to know they still need at least some limited amount of help. A lot less than they've had before, but still some. I think President Karzai himself knows that, but he's withholding his signature because he thinks that gives him more leverage over us. He thinks we want the bases so desperately that we will therefore be less difficult to deal with if he has leverage over us. I don't agree with his analysis, but that's, I believe, the way he views it. In terms of this report's influence on the debate, I think, it does make some Americans, some policymakers, some in Congress worry that perhaps it's not worth sustaining the effort. But for President Obama, if I was going to venture a prediction, not knowing the man and not having spoken with him about this, it's still become largely his war. This is the war he campaigned on as the right war back in 2007, 2008. It's the war where he tripled American combat forces.
He did that at the request of the military officials in charge at the time.
Yes, but he also asked them to go ahead and do an assessment through Secretary Gates, and he's the one that approved putting Stan McChrystal in charge. He's the one that approved putting a much greater focus on this war, and therefore it's hard for him to walk away from it just because he thinks there's a chance it won't work down the line. I think President Obama in the end will continue to limit our exposure here and try to minimize our presence, but still not pull the plug. It's just not really an option that I think he has available to him.
Michael Hanlon, I have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.